Muy buenas tardes. Hola, hola. ¿Qué tal? Bienvenidos. Me alegro mucho de veros aquí virtualmente. Soy Caridad Dawson, trabajo para PAU2021 University y os damos la bienvenida a nuestro webinar sobre un grado muy interesante que se llama el comportamiento humano y ciencias sociales. Esto se ofrece en PAU2021 University. Tenemos el placer de contar con nosotros hoy la directora del programa académico de este grado, doctora Jessica Tollett. PAU University imparte todos los grados en inglés. Por eso Jessica va a impartir su charla ahora en inglés, pero por favor, si tenéis cualquier duda podéis escribirlo en el chat box, en el público chat box, en español o en inglés. No os cortáis, es un momento muy valioso para pues, conocer a Jessica, conocer el programa, conocer nosotros como universidad y pasarlo bien también. O sea, por favor, español e inglés, adelante, no pasa nada. También, chicos, os recuerdo que podéis agendar una reunión virtual después de esta charla. Si es mucha información y estáis ahí un poco pensando, pues no pasa nada, podéis agendar una reunión virtual con nosotros después, para otro día, ¿vale? Entonces, para empezar a conoceros, por favor, ¿por qué no escribir en el chat box vuestros nombres y en qué colegios estáis estudiando actualmente? ¿Vale? Así podemos ir conociéndoos un poco más, quiénes sois, de dónde venís. ¿Vale? Y entonces, pues voy a pasar el mando a Jessica para que nos cuente un poco más sobre este grado súper interesante.
Gracias, Caridad. Hi, everybody. I'm really delighted today to be speaking with you about behavioral science and why it's important. It's a relatively new field, and IE has taken on this project of really launching a new bachelor degree in a field that's very, very exciting. So today I'm hoping to teach you more and get you excited about the world of behavioral science, okay? So in order to kind of go through the day, the hour rather, I have prepared various activities. So this workshop is going to be super dynamic. También hablo castellano, ¿vale? Doy mis clases en inglés, pero si tienes cualquier duda o pregunta, no hay problema de escribirlo en castellano, te contesto en castellano, hablamos en Spanglish, sin duda, okay? So please just feel free. I hope that you guys are excited to participate and engage. We're going to have a little bit of a warm-up. I have a small activity designed, and then I'm going to tell you really what is behavioral science and why is it so important. And then to kind of wrap up the hour before we enter the question and answer period, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the difference between how we think about behavioral science versus what we know of psychology, because I think a lot of people who are interested in behavioral science are also interested in the field of psychology. And before I actually go ahead and introduce myself, one thing I like to do in all of my workshops is give some resources. So you'll see here at the beginning, as well as at the end of the workshop, I have some books, I have some podcasts, I have some TED Talks, I have ideas about how you can learn more about behavioral science if what we do in the next 55 minutes is interesting for you, okay? So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Caridad already did a really nice introduction, but I am American. I'm from California, as you may or may not be able to tell from my accent. I've been at IE for about 4 years. And when I'm not in the classroom teaching courses on research methods, communication, diversity, behavioral science, I am outside, I'm meditating, I'm boxing, I'm dancing, I'm going out for restaurants. I love living in Madrid. And I've had this really interesting journey where I came to IE by way of being a sociologist and coming to Spain to do my research when I was studying my thesis. So I'm happy to answer more questions about myself or my background, but I actually wanted to know a little bit more about you guys. And I thought that there could be a fun way of doing this with a little riddle. So the activity is called Married and Looking. Stefan is looking at Anna, but Anna is looking at George. Stefan is married, but George is not. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? Please feel free to type into the chat what you think the answer is. Do you think it's A, yes, B, no, or C, can't determine? So I'll give you guys like 30 seconds to fill in the chat box. Are you seeing any answers pop up, Caridad? No? Are you guys being shy?
They are being a little shy right now. Come on, guys, don't be bashful.
Don't worry. I will go ahead and walk you through the answer. Okay, so let's see what we get. So, is a married person looking at an unmarried person? We know that Stefan is married, and we know that George is not married. So the variable here is really Anna. So let's say that Anna is married. So if Anna's married, then a married person is looking at an unmarried person because Anna is looking at George, right? Now, let's say that Anna's unmarried. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? Yes, because Stefan is married and he's looking at Anna. So whether or not Anna is married or unmarried, a married person is still looking at an unmarried person. And my sense is that most of you would have guessed C, can't determine, because that's what I guessed when I did the activity. And that's what most people actually have some interesting data. Yeah. You guys see? Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we tested the data with young professionals or even senior managers, and 89% of young professionals said that you can't determine, right? And 65% of senior managers said you can't determine. So that's more than half in both contexts, right? And I think it's just, well, I know what can explain it. It's that we were using our system one. So one of the fundamentals of behavioral science is understanding the way that the brain works, right? So some very famous behavioral scientists have told us that there's kind of two parts of the brain that we activate at different times. We have part of our brain that's called system one that we use most of the time. So we use this system one to make quick decisions, to think through ideas, to communicate. I know how to speak English. I know how to speak Spanish. So I'm using my system one when I'm using my language skills to even deliver this workshop right now, right? And so we'll use system one in circumstances like, you know, there's a lot of things going on in our brain. I imagine that most of you guys have a lot of things to do. You have different subjects in class, in school, you have your extracurricular activities. Maybe you play some sports or instruments. You have plans with your friends, right? So we're always thinking about doing a bunch of things, and our brains are very, very complicated. So we can manage a lot of information at once. And in order to not get exhausted from all the things going on in our minds and all the activities that we have going on, we use what we call system one, right? And so that's for busyness, for time pressure. I gave you 30 seconds to answer that question, right? So that's not a lot of time. Now, if I had given you, 5 minutes, I think you guys would have gone through the exercise the way that I did. And you probably would have gotten the answer yes, right? Now, our brains are so smart that when we need to make an important decision, we don't make it rush, right? We take our time. So we use this other half of our brain that's called system two, okay? So these are kind of the two ways that our mind works, and that's how we make quick decisions or we make well thought out decisions. So while you're deciding whether a married person is looking at an unmarried person, that might be something with system one. Deciding whether or not you want to go to IE University or another university is going to be a decision that you make with system two, right? So feel free to ask any questions that you have while we go through the workshop, okay? So what is behavioral science? Does anyone want to take a guess? Okay. Shy bunch. All right. I have a definition for you. So this is my favorite definition. It is behavioral science to me is much more than an emerging discipline of science. This is what behavioral science is to me: a comprehensive, if not complete, tool set, allowing us to understand why we behave the way we behave and make the decisions that we make. So behavioral science is really the science of decision making, right? Elaborate on that a bit more as we go through the workshop so that you can really understand how important it is for behavioral scientists to have an understanding of decision-making at an individual level. So what we're choosing to have for dinner, or for an organization, I'm the CEO and I need to make this decision that will affect all of my employees. At a societal level, I'm the president of a country. I need to make this decision that will affect all of my citizens and non-citizens, right? So this is how we're going to be thinking about decisions and human behavior at these different levels in behavioral science. So I wanted to give an example of thinking about the ways that we kind of employ behavioral science. So I've prepared a bunch of questions to really ask, what do we think about this topic? So first example, why would you recycle? I have 4 options here. The plastic waste in our oceans and the damage to animals make me sick. It's simple and quick to do. There are specific bins for each type of waste. Everyone recycles nowadays. It's the right thing to do. Or last but not least, recycling reduces the need for extracting, refining, and processing raw materials, all of which create air and water pollution. So does anyone want to take a guess about which option that they would choose? There's no right answer. I'm just curious to see about what motivates us to make different decisions.
Guys, are you gonna try and take a stab? Remember, you can also answer in Spanish. I'm gonna just jump in, okay, Jess? I'm just gonna say, en mi opinión, yo lo haría por A.
Okay.
Great. I don't want the oceans to be sick.
Okay. Why would you consider cutting down on your meat consumption? You have 4 options here. So people around me are eating less meat than before, so it feels like the right thing to do. Because of the Amazon, the planet's lungs are burning, so cattle farming is a big part of that. Each pound of meat produced requires 10 different liters of water, and livestock farming accounts for 18% of human-produced greenhouse emissions. Or there's lots of non-meat options everywhere I go, so it's not a problem. Okay, so I have a couple more questions. But all of the questions are kind of designed around a similar concept, which is, 4 approaches to thinking about behavioral change. Okay, so I have these questions. Why did I ask the survey? Well, I wanted to see how you guys thought about different sorts of behaviors and what motivates your particular behavior, because behavioral scientists are really keen to understand, why do we do the things that we do, right? And maybe you will have noticed in the first 2 questions of the survey that there was kind of different categories of how you can respond. So I'm going to walk through the 4 different categories of how to respond. The first was cognitive, using data, using numbers. So for those of you who have ever read an article that says, a staggering fact or an important information that says, 90% of people believe this, if we go back to the very beginning of the workshop, and you remember how many young professionals and how many senior managers got that answer wrong, you would be motivated to understand the data. So this is kind of a cognitive approach to understanding and changing behavior. So for those of you who would have selected the answers about 15% carbon tax to reduce and meet our targets, or motivated by a flyer of statistics when scientists estimate that we will run out of water, then you're more motivated to make your decisions based on a cognitive choice. The second option is an emotional choice. So Caridad, when she said that she didn't like to see pictures of plastic and waste in our ocean, that was her reacting on an emotional level. Sometimes we see pictures of sad children that live in countries where they don't have enough food, and that's why we decide to donate money, right? So this is one way that we can influence behavior, by touching on people's emotions. Those commercials, anuncios for the Loteria del Gordo, that we love, where it's an old grandpa and he's spending time with his grandma. This is when we know that emotions will make us do certain types of decisions. Social. We are all social beings. And one of the key things that we'll learn in behavioral science at any point in time is just how important what other people are doing is for us. So maybe, for example, you said all of my friends and peers are trying to cut down on driving, and I don't want to be the one driving everywhere, right? You're looking at what other people are doing, and that is motivating your decision. And finally, behavioral, right? It's easy to do. We can set up charging stations for the electric cars on every corner, so you can take your electric car out and not have a problem like finding a way to get your car charged. So these are the 4 ways that we can think about influencing behavior: cognitive, using data and numbers; emotional, social, by what other people are doing; and behavioral, by making someone actually take an action that is easy to do. So I took this survey at a conference. It was a behavioral science conference. And so most of our answers were behavioral, of saying, oh, well, that was easy to do, right? But obviously, all of us at one point in time were more impacted by an emotional decision or a cognitive decision. We really looked at, this particular situation and what motivated us. And so the key that I want to highlight here is that understanding why we make certain decisions depends on the context that we're making those choices. So if you are a vegetarian, you are probably a vegetarian for a particular reason. And so your answer to why you would eat less meat is going to look different from someone who likes to have jamon and queso for lunch, right? So think about the particular context and the unique situation where we have to make certain decisions for how we're influenced and what we will actually decide. And so that's kind of one of the key roles as a behavioral scientist, to really understand the particular context and, when possible, to shape that context, to influence that context when people are making decisions so that they can make different decisions. And I'll give you some more examples as we go through the workshop. So why is behavioral science so important? Well, there's something called the intention-action gap. And the intention-action gap is the difference between what we want to do, lo que queremos hacer, y lo que hacemos, right? So I want to go for a run every morning before I start work and wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning so I can get my fitness in, but then I actually just sleep in until 8 in the morning because don't feel like waking up that early, right? So we don't often make the decision that's good for us, which is working out, being healthy, waking up early, taking advantage of the day, right? We just sometimes make the decision that's easiest for us, or that causes us to do the least amount of change in our lives, right? And so here's kind of 3 examples of why we don't always do what we intend to do or what we should do. We're so distracted. And especially nowadays with social media and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all those things, we're just overstimulated all the time with new information and ways of being hyper connected, right? Some of us are just really busy. We have extracurriculars, we have school, we have all our classes, we have our brothers and sisters, we're busy, we're doing all these things. And most of us in some moment in time are going to be very lazy. Right? And so for all of these reasons, we don't end up doing the things that we should do. We just do the things that it's easiest to do. And so what we've learned about behavioral science, and one of the key things that behavioral science allows us to do, is really to close this gap by understanding why we do the things that we do and influencing us and encouraging us to do other things. So I'm going to play a snippet of a short video just so you can get a sense of some of the really amazing work that we're doing in behavioral science. This video is based in India, and it's a campaign about getting children in India and a community in India to wash their hands. So I'm going to play a little clip from that. So that was just a short video of an example of the really cool types of projects and meaningful projects and opportunities that you have to make a difference should you enter the world of behavioral science, right? So you could see in the video that they introduced a problem and they identified different solutions by testing them out. So they tried different things to see if this would work. And in the end, they found these 3 things that made a big difference, right? One of them being that you show that everyone else is doing it. So I talked about that before, about a social way of changing behavior is by seeing what other people are doing. So you'll see in the rest of the presentation that I have a few more examples that you may or may not notice or pay attention to, but it's behavioral science, okay? So this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about behavioral science and marketing, right? And social media influencers are the prime example of really looking at other people to drive your decisions, right? This is where influencers come from. They tell us what is trendy, what is cool, what kind of restaurants we should go to, what kind of clothes we should buy, right? And we look at them as examples and we participate in these activities, we shop at these places because we see that someone that we admire or someone that we respect or someone that we care about or someone that we envy is doing it, right? Another example of behavioral science is thinking about when you're about to buy a plane ticket or a bus ticket or an outfit, and they tell you, date prisa, because there's only 2 left, right? And you're like, oh my God, Mom, Dad, I need to get this because these flights are running out. It's a trick because it's just a way of getting you to make a decision because it's acting on this emotion that you have of fear of missing out, right? In English, we have this phrase called FOMO. That's fear of missing out. We don't want to miss out on the party. We don't want to miss out on the cool outfit. We don't want to miss out on the flight, right? So behavioral science is something that we encounter every day in marketing. A last example that I want to show is thinking about this ad that says less guilty, more pleasure, right? They have this number on here. So some of us who are drawn by statistics and cognitive ways of changing behavior are going to look at this and say, oh, wow, you can have so many more pop chips. Look at that number, right? And they are driven by the number and the data. And that ad combines data to make you want to buy pop chips instead of Pringles or Lay's or any other brand, right? So we use behavioral science every day in our marketing and in our decisions to make certain purchases or eat at certain places or buy certain things, right? So I noticed that you guys haven't asked a lot of questions. I think it's totally okay if you're shy, pero si hay alguna pregunta o alguna duda o más interés, por favor, no dudes en decir algo, ¿vale? Okay, so a lot of people who think about applying to the behavioral science program, they'll meet me and they'll say, behavioral science is so interesting. Like, I've never heard of it before. I mean, it sounds a little bit like psychology and I really like psychology. So I've kind of prepared this slide to just show you, what the difference between psychology and behavioral sciences is, okay? So first, psychology is kind of like a subfield of behavioral science. It's a piece of behavioral science. So if you were to study behavioral science, then you would also learn some psychology, right? In psychology, we use more quantitative methods. What does that mean? That means that they're more likely to use data and numbers and statistics. And there's a focus on the brain. There's a focus on how the brain works. Before I was talking about system 1 and system 2, where you think about how you make decisions. So in psychology, you're going to study the brain in very complicated ways about our emotions, about our motivation, right? And it's really about a focus on individuals. So those are kind of the main 4 factors that I would say identify a psychology bachelor, for example. Now, for those of you who are interested in studying people and human behavior, but don't necessarily love all of the statistics and numbers, there's also qualitative ways that we study people. So conducting interviews is something that you'll learn to do, or observation, which could be as simple as going to a supermarket and watching what kind of products people are buying for a class assignment so that you could understand preferences, right? There's less of a focus on the brain and more of a focus on decision making. So we sent you to the supermarket to watch people buying jelly and jam and marmelada, and I want to tell you which kinds they're buying. Are they buying naranja amarga? Are they buying melocotón? You know what I mean? So this is the kind of way that you could imagine combining qualitative, but also just thinking about what is it that allows us to make these certain types of decisions, right? And the third goes back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is that it's not so much of a focus on individuals, but more on relationships between individuals and society. So before I talked about your family unit, your school, your city, your organization that you're involved with, your company, your country, right? So this is kind of something that we'll investigate in the Bachelor in Behavior and Social Sciences, as well as thinking about these kind of relationship as social people, right? And finally, the world of behavioral science is a combination. So you will learn about psychology, you'll learn about economics, sociology, anthropology. So it combines many different fields that want to understand people and uses many different tools in order to understand them, okay? So those are kind of the main differences between psychology and behavioral sciences. Now, if you were to say, okay, I like that ALMA campaign, I think it's really cool to be able to make a big difference in rural communities in other countries, then you might want to think about studying the Bachelor in Behavior and Social Sciences. And in this bachelor, we have different types of courses that you could take. So here I'm showing you sociology and anthropology, psychology, research methods where you learn how to run a survey and collect data and analyze data, statistics, professional skills. You'll learn about team building, about writing, about how to deal with stress and self-management, right? So these are kind of different categories that you could imagine would be an important part of really understanding the world of behavioral science and giving you an advantage for when you graduate from your bachelor and go on into the world. I really wanted to give you a summary about what the bachelor's like at IE because it's this hands-on multidisciplinary degree that really empowers students to study, understand, and influence human behavior. And the images here you'll see are different types of courses that you'll take. So you'll take courses that are more quantitative and data-driven in nature, like simulating and modeling to understand change or research methods. Then you'll take some courses that are really about understanding people. So you could understand the brain in the behavioral neuroscience course, or you could understand communities and societies like you would in the community, society, and culture class. And finally, by the time you graduate from your bachelor, you'll really know how to work in an organization to really motivate behavioral change. And so when you think about the field of behavioral science, it's so new that sometimes people ask me, oh my gosh, that's so interesting, but what kind of job can I get? Well, there's lots of organizations and industries that are hiring behavioral scientists. One of the primary types of jobs and internships that students who study the Bachelor in Behavior and Social Sciences do is consulting. So you can think of McKinsey, you can think of Accenture, PwC, you know, the big tower in the north of Madrid, for those of you who are from Madrid, right? But then there's also smaller consulting firms that focus on behavioral change directly, based in the UK, based in the United States, and even now based in Spain. So you might want to do marketing and communication. Before I showed you some ways that we use behavioral science in marketing, right? I told you that we learn about running surveys and doing interviews. So you might want to work in research, maybe at a university or maybe within a company. Human resources, right? Human resources are within companies that really work to make sure that they can help all of the employees have a really optimistic and great experience at that company. And the way to do that is to understand the behaviors that are going on within the organization. The ALMA campaign was an example of how you can be hired by an NGO, right? You can go into a community, maybe even a government or a local municipality in another country might hire you to help work on a problem that they have there, right? So there's lots of different types of jobs that are hiring behavioral scientists. Even some companies that should sound very familiar. Facebook, Nestle, Apple, Amazon, BBVA, one of the biggest banks in Spain, they have a behavioral economics unit. So there's lots of places that are looking for behavioral scientists and would love to have someone that has your expertise coming out of the Bachelor in Behavior and Social Sciences. If this was exciting and interesting and you kind of want to dig a little bit deeper, then obviously there's lots of resources online that can help you to figure out, what do I want to do with my bachelor? What do I want to do with my career? But also, I don't know. I want to learn more about behavioral science before I make a decision. So I have these resources here. I'm happy to share with you in the question and answer time period some of my favorite books, some of my favorite TED Talks, a little bit more about these organizations. Ideas 42 does consulting. If you just Google them, they have lots of briefs and reports that you can read and access. So for me, it's really important that this workshop is not just to teach you about behavioral science at IE University, but behavioral science as a field and why it's so important for us as a society, a global society, of thinking about helping people make better decisions, healthier decisions, more responsible decisions with their finances. These are kind of the key areas that we're seeing a growth in behavioral science, okay? So if you're interested, I have some books here that I have read and that really help me to understand, wow, behavioral science is so interesting and incredible, right? There's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. Nudge is probably one of the most famous behavioral science books. And my favorite one is a book called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. He also has some TED Talks if you want to check that out. So if you liked what you heard, here's some books that you might want to read. And I'm going to transition now to questions. So we have plenty of time to answer any questions. Caridad is going to join me in case that you have a question specifically about the university. We can talk about social sciences. We can talk about behavioral sciences. We can talk about the video. Anything that you're kind of still curious about or want to know, we would be happy to answer for you.
Thank you, Jessica, so much. Whoa, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, I hear an echo, but I found that very interesting. But definitely, guys, take the time to ask questions about, the science itself or IE University. We're here to help you. So remember, español y inglés. Podemos. O Spanglish también. I'm afraid that this is a very, very quiet group.
That's okay. I think you have Caridad's contact information. I have my email address here in case you wanted to ask me a question later on about anything that we talked about today. And yeah, I think that's it for me.
Exactly. No, and thank you again, Jessica. And this is being recorded, which you will be able to access later. And also, if you do have any remaining questions, don't forget to set up a virtual meeting with us where I have availability starting from next week, so that if you guys have any questions or curiosities, you can set up a time and we can also have a one-to-one conversation, and I can help you out, get any more insight on the university. Okay.
Are you sure you guys don't have any questions? Okay.
Yeah. It was all so well explained that there were no questions. That's what happened. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us, and we do look forward to future possible, engagements with you. And we have lots of events at our IE University webpage. Lots of opportunities to see, to be able to speak with me or Jessica in other events. We have lots of jornadas de puertas abiertas, all virtual at the moment, and we really do look forward to being able to connect with you some other time. Okay, well, thank you, and it's been a pleasure.